So my latest video on the state of the game talked a bit about combat, and I got a lot of really great comments and feedback coming in with lots of different points of view on the subject. One reoccurring theme that seemed to pop up for older players, however, was their disappointment with 5th edition overall and its lack of complexity, to which I'll both agree with and agree to disagree with a little bit. Overall, I find Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition to be my favorite edition of D&D and my favorite tabletop role-playing game to date. However, it's obviously not perfect. I mean, no role-playing game is. Just look at the constant little tweaks that Mike Mearls is messing around with, like his initiative system, his dislike of the bonus action, and his most recent rework of two-weapon fighting. Though I kind of imagine it's a bit like a painter who is never completely happy with their final piece. But while I have a few issues with minor things like how the skill system doesn't really grow much from level 1 to 20, the vast majority of the things that I would like to see tweaked are really purely combat-based. So I wanted to talk about what a Dungeons & Dragons 5.5 edition might look like as far as addressing these issues specifically, because if push came to shove and we end up 7 years out from 5th edition, I would much rather see a 5.5 player's handbook that will still totally keep all of my previously purchased books like Volo's, Curse of Strahd, etc. relevant than get an entire new Dungeons & Dragons 6th edition when 5e is still close enough to being an ideal game system for me anyways. Okay, let's start off with one of my absolute biggest bugaboos with D&D 5e, standing up. This is number one on my list of things that just make me cringe. It really does make my skin crawl. Here's an example of how it works now. In this example, we have a level 3 party of 4 fighting off a few bugbears. As you can see, our fighter is taking on one of the bugbears all by himself, and of course we have the initiative order in there as well. Let's say this fighter is getting low on HP and wants to try to change his tactics by knocking an opponent on the ground to get the upper hand in this duel. As the rules are now, the fighter would make a shove using one of his attacks as part of his action. If he wins the contest against the bugbear, the fighter can knock the bugbear prone or shove it back 5 feet. So the fighter wins and decides to knock the bugbear prone, go figure. And we move on in our initiative order. A few fellow party members take actions against their foes, and now it's the bugbear's turn. He simply stands up, spending half of his movement speed, raises his great club, and crushes the skull of our fighter. Because the fighter obviously didn't miraculously skip the bugbear in initiative to take advantage of the bugbear being swept off of his feet, the end result is 2 combatants were trading blows, and one of them gave up their turn to accomplish, in essence, nothing. Now, something else to consider here is that a shove only takes the place of one of your attacks. So if hypothetically the fighter had 2 attacks, wouldn't he be able to shove the bugbear down with his first attack and then attack at advantage against the prone foe with his second? Yes, that's true, but we're still in the hole big time mathematically. There is no advantage for rolling 2 dice for one attack over rolling 1 die for 2 separate attacks. At best, you'll successfully trip your foe and land 1 attack with your advantage, where you might even crit. But alternatively, if you had simply made 2 attacks against your foe, you might have successfully hit them twice. I mean, you might even land a critical with 1 and hit 1 with the second, or you even have a chance to crit twice. What if we then replaced our fighter with a ranger? That ranger could have cast Hunter's Mark as a bonus action, dealing an extra 1d6 on each of those 2 attacks, furthering our mathematical disadvantage to knock the bugbear prone. So how could this be addressed in a 5.5 edition of D&D? Well, we want to make sure that we don't swing the pendulum too far the other way, and so one thing we need to be cautious of is making shoving an opponent so good that it is mathematically always the best option. We don't want to slow down the game because everyone is always trying to shove monsters and PCs around. Now, I think most people's gut instinct to making a game mechanic better would be to give it a higher risk and higher reward. So in this case, we might look at giving an attack of opportunity to the defender if someone attempts to knock them off their feet, much akin to, if not identical to, older systems like 3rd edition. But guys, I don't think that this is the right route here. This would slow down the game, and we're talking about really reworking too much of the base mechanics by simply rolling back to a ton of attacks of opportunity like we had previously. The problem I see with this game mechanic is not the attack itself, but rather the aftermath of the standing up mechanic. If I'm not going to get an offensive advantage, then perhaps we should maybe look at giving a more defensive advantage when risking giving up a chance to just deal out damage with an attack for a shove that can still fail. My suggestion would be one of two approaches. One is you would give the prone character an option. Either take opportunity attacks from nearby melee foes as they rise, or they could forfeit their action this turn to prevent this with the disengage action. And any opportunity attacks naturally could be used instead to attempt to shove the prone character back down. Or two, I would allow the prone character to rise at half the cost of their movement speed like normal, but if the character who shoved them down is still within 5 feet of them when they attempt to stand, they would be considered on their heels and have disadvantage on their attacks for the round, and of course lose their reaction for the round. So if the attacking character continued to move onto another foe, the prone character could stand up with half their movement speed and attack as normal as it is now, if of course they could reach a new opponent this turn. I think the second option here is a much better solution, as it seems far more elegant in keeping true to 5e's current combat rules without slowing it down for additional opportunity attacks, and keeping true to the notion that D&D 5e should be as easy as possible for new players coming in. I think it's pretty simple. Hey, guys, if you knock someone down, they'll have disadvantage to attack you on the next turn. That should be easy enough for Dungeon Masters to teach in the heat of the moment to new players. And moving on to my second issue with combat, disarming, this is easily fixed the same way as well, furthering the elegance and simplicity. Disarming has the exact same problem right now in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition as knocking someone prone. They simply reach down, pick up their weapon, and attack you like they would have done anyways, with you having given up your attack and potential damage to no effect. But by adding in a rule that a character that has been disarmed is on their heels, granting them disadvantage and no reactions, we now have created the risk for reward factor of implementing tactical strategy that could pay off well or could still fail completely without slowing down the game or adding in any additional modifiers or numbers that people will have a hard time remembering in the middle of their turn. And to top it all off, the rules for both would be identical and thus reinforce themselves when learning the rules. So we're not talking about one set of rules for disarm and another set of rules for knocking someone prone. And while the outcome of the on your heels condition is the same thing, the strategy in combat could cause totally different outcomes at different times. It still might make sense to disarm a foe to have your nearby bow-wielding ally kick away their weapon in one instance, and it might make more sense to simply try and knock an opponent over in another so your allies can get advantage on their attacks this round before your foe can get back on their feet. So that brings me to another mechanic that I think needs a slight rework from its optional inclusion in D&D 5e, flanking. But first, it's sponsor time! So huge shout out to the folks over at Elderwood Academy with their stunning line of gaming accessories. Guys, I get emails every day from people wanting to sponsor the channel, and simply put, I politely pass because I don't want to start throwing random stuff at you that I don't like or use myself, and that's why I love working with Elderwood Academy. These guys make the most stunning and beautiful gaming accessories on the planet, and I am absolutely in love with the stuff that they make. I've been using their dice tower and mini hex chests since I got my hands on them, and my home group is totally jealous whenever I whip these things out at the table. Every single product that Elderwood makes can be completely customized, from the color and type of wood, the decorative art, the interior styles, and on and on. And these products, guys, are designed to last for years and years. So down in the description box below, I'll throw a link where you guys can go and check out their entire handcrafted lineup. Thank you, Elderwood Academy, for being a part of the Taking 20 team. Flanking is probably one of my all-time favorite game mechanics in D&D. And when I found out that it was just an optional rule and not really used at every table in 5e, I'll admit I was pretty disappointed. To keep this short and sweet, I'm not really sure why flanking was thrown out of the player's handbook in this edition. My only thought was that maybe Wizards thought it was either too confusing on lining everything up for the players, or maybe they didn't want to include modifiers in combat and thus thought advantage was too good, so they only included it as an optional rule in the DMG for people who still wanted to use it. I obviously don't have the answer here, but to me, there was a big drop-off in round-to-round maneuvering in combat for 5th edition, and I think the lack of a really solid flanking rule is a pretty big culprit in that change. And the optional rule of advantage on attacks is way too big of a swing mathematically, in my opinion. In addition, it undermines the help action, so by adding in advantage on flanking, you're in essence reducing the number of things that you can do in combat for an overall wash. At my table, I've included a very, very simple +1 modifier on attack rolls. I find this to be much more balanced than either advantage or even a +2 modifier, and it surprises me how many attacks in a session from both PCs and NPCs have their outcome actually affected by this +1 bonus. But more importantly than landing more attacks, I find the biggest positive change is that my players, with melee characters especially, actually move around on the board and shift positioning to gain more advantageous tactical positioning. And of course, for me as a Dungeon Master, I find it helps create a significantly more narrative combat than just trying to describe to my players each trading blow after blow without recycling the same few phrases over and over. Being able to say, "The lanky orc on your right exchanges a few words that sound garbled to you with his companion," as the orc on your left nods and shifts his weight to the right, forcing you to fend off their attacks from both sides. The lanky orc lashes out with the 17 as he continues to press you high with his powerful mace, and the orc on your left jabs out at you low with the 19 as he scores a long cut on your inner thigh. You take a total of 23 damage as you realize you are in a tough position to defend against them both. So I'd love to see a simple modifier be added back into the game for flanking. Again, I like the simple +1, but I assume that a much larger form of playtesting from the player base by Wizards of the Coast could more accurately determine if maybe doubling your proficiency bonus with your weapon, adding a +1, or even adding in a +2 modifier would be the best option mathematically overall. Next up is casting spells in the middle of the throes of combat. I'll admit here that my 3.5 roots really struggle with this one, because I can't see a way that a wizard with a melee combatant right in front of them would simply be able to take the time to cast Magic Missile, a verbal and somatic spell, at another low-life target on the battlefield completely freely. To me, I want to be able to charge up as a fighter or barbarian and make life difficult on a drow priestess who is trying to cast devastatingly powerful spells. But on the other hand, I don't want to simply reintroduce old mechanics of constant attacks of opportunities against spellcasters, especially for things like Shocking Grasp. That's really going to slow down the game, and the net gain that we'll get by making combat a little more tactical, it just simply won't be worth it in my opinion. Additionally, if the spell Cure Wounds as an ally rushes up to save a dying companion, suddenly starts provoking opportunity attacks from the ogre standing over the PC they just dropped, or even requires the caster to make a concentration check to successfully cast it, we're really talking about some serious changes here to the game overall, and that's not even taking into account bonus action spells and how they would play into all of this. So I'd still like to see something, some kind of change that rewards tactical players for being able to close in on an enemy caster, but something that won't drastically change combat to the point of a total rework, or require some sort of flag for each spell in the book on which ones provoke and which ones don't. I'd suggest one of two simple changes. Option one is that spells that make a ranged spell attack already have disadvantage if next to an enemy melee combatant, but save spells aren't affected at all. Well, we can steal from a mechanic that is literally already in the game, Mage Slayer, and grant advantage to allies against this save as the caster contends with an enormous Goliath barbarian in front of them. This also wouldn't diminish the value of Mage Slayer itself to the point of becoming useless, as it would still allow that combatant an opportunity attack as a reaction if, of course, they have that feat. Option two is a little different. We could allow everything to continue working as is, with the one caveat that any melee combatant within 5 feet of someone casting a spell would then have advantage against that caster on their next attack against them if they start their turn still within 5 feet of them. So a cleric could still slide up to a fallen ally and heal them without risking taking an attack of opportunity and losing the spell. But as they focus on their spell, they're obviously more susceptible to the dangers of combat around them. Casting your magic missile right in someone's face would still happen normally. But if your energy balls of force don't drop the opponent lining up their axe with your head, you're going to be in some trouble as you focus on bending your arms and chanting during your spellcasting. So I think that this would add in just a small touch of a more tactical approach here to both close in on enemy casters and trying to keep your allies on the battlefield between you and the dangerous enemies as you rain down firebolts, especially since so many classes in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition have access to spells now with Trickster Rogues and Eldritch Knights as examples. Okay, let's talk about grappling. Grappling in 5e is, again, much like disarming and knocking someone prone, completely useless to do in an exchange for a standard attack. I actually love all of the mechanics here that are already built into the game. The only problem here is how they are actually divvied up. If you grapple someone, their speed becomes 0. But they can still attack you, so congratulations. Your barbarian grabbed the bandit and outpowered him, and now you have a front row seat as he turns, takes his flail, and smashes you in the head. Yeah, with his flail. That's how the rules work right now. This is a little silly, in my opinion. All you are trying to do is use your strength advantage to do something cool in combat that's better than the two of you standing in place like statues, exchanging blows. And all you got out of it was forfeiting your attack while your foe continues to stab you to death. But D&D 5e already has simple and great rules in place for handling this with a grappler feat. Now you can start a grapple, scuff and scrap with your foe, and pin them to the ground. And I think the mechanics here are totally sound. I just don't like that the only way you can do this is with the extremely high cost of a feat. So I'd suggest moving the rules for Grappler over to the standard grappling rules and drop the advantage on attacks against your grappled foe. Let everyone dogpile with their characters if they want to. We're just following the rule of cool here. Then add in disadvantage against the attacking grappler from the grappled one. If you want to take it a step further, then go back to the grappler feat and give them advantage on their attacks and disarm attempts. It's simple, clean, with minimal changes to learn. And finally, just to touch on ranged combat and cover quickly, I have to say that I'm very pleased with the rules in place for this as is, and I wouldn't suggest really any changes here in a 5.5 edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Can these be a little clunky at times when you think about trying to fire an arrow at someone as a friend is clashing swords with them? Sure, but overall with the +2 half cover rules in place, I think that these are solid enough for DMs that enforce them well without needing to complicate or change them really any further. But of course, I wanted to at least mention them in this video prior to getting in any comments asking about changes there as well. All of these changes are just some of the things that I would like to see Wizards of the Coast look at addressing in a 5.5 edition. And by no means am I saying that even the things that I suggested here are the best, absolute best changes because I'm so much smarter than everyone else or anything like that. I think the 5th edition is really great, and with a few simple tweaks, it could extend its shelf life quite a bit. And while I think that a few more tweaks in other places, especially skills, could make for some real positive and welcome changes to the game overall, for now, I wanted to specifically look at combat and trying to make it more interesting with a few more options that are still simple and true to what Wizards intended with the core game. After all of these changes aren't just for tactical combat-loving players. A lot of these changes will help narrative-driven games and allow those players that want to be narrative and run up the stairs and tackle somebody and wrest the dagger out of their hand. It'll allow that more narrative combat to take place as well. So ultimately, I think seeing a few changes to some of these base game mechanics could help both groups, people that love more tactical combat and people who love more narrative-driven combat. But I'm curious to see where the game is going. As of this video, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition has already completed its 4th full year and is now working on its 5th, based off of previous editions of not just Dungeons & Dragons, but of many role-playing games we could very easily, guys, be at its midlife right now today, moving into the second half of the game. Even if the game goes a full 10 years, we'd at least be closing in on the midway point for 5th edition within the next 12 months. But if it were my choice, I would much rather see a 5.5 edition come out in the next 24 to 36 months that keeps all of my previous monster manuals and books still totally usable and relevant than a total new edition of the game in the next 48 months. So what do you guys think? Have we already passed the midway point for 5th edition now that it has completed its 4th full year in circulation? Do you think we'll get a 5.5 edition first, or will we just get an entire new 6th edition? And what changes would you like to see in a potential 5.5 edition Player's Handbook? I want to give a huge shout out to all of the kick-ass patrons over at welcomeadventures.com for helping me support the channel. Thank you guys so much for what you do. If you guys like this video, you want to support more content like this, welcomeadventures.com is a great way to do it, and we've got some cool rewards over there that you can snag for yourself. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I'd love to have you subscribe. Every week I put out new videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit the subscribe button down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.